for such a small country, the events we're about to describe would be shocking in a massive country like the United States or Russia, or in a huge city with millions of people. So for an island with less than 500,000 people on it, two islands really with less than 500,000 people on them, it's just kind of amazing that this persists so much.
Could
This
you
this
could
is
right? I just wanted to
yeah.
add a comparison. Could you imagine all of these things happening in, for say, Cleveland?
I
Could
mean,
you imagine?
it would be like a national emergency.
Prime Minister Joseph Muscat will step down over a political crisis stemming from the murder of journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia.
And we are live. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Solvable Mysteries Podcast, episode number 15. My name is Juras. As always, I'm joined by Glenn. How are you, man?
Fine. Hello and happy holidays. It's a kind of a strangely rainy holiday season here in Los Angeles tonight.
I mean, the weather is still probably fantastic compared because
Yeah.
we actually had snow for the first time this year, like
Goodness.
a few days ago. So I mean, it wasn't so good for me. Like when I saw that snow, it just got real, and all that other crap involved with winter now begins with like the warm jackets and all that other nonsense. But I guess today we're going to be talking about a very interesting case, a bit of a political case, but nevertheless a fascinating murder case of a famous Maltese investigative journalist, Daphne Caruana Galizia. So you're seeing her picture right here. She has died on the 16th of October in 2017. So it was a little bit more than 2 years from now. And the reason we picked this topic for this episode is because as of I believe 2 days ago, there are some new, I guess, very interesting information that came out regarding this case. Am I not mistaken, Glenn?
No, you're right. I mean, it's amazing. I think as we describe more about her, the audience will see what probably a true hero she was and is, and even beyond the grave, she has the power to bring down the government of Malta with her accusations and her research.
Exactly. So Daphne was a Maltese journalist, a writer as well, and I guess she was best known for her anti-corruption activism. She basically reported on political events in Malta. So for our international viewers who don't really know where Malta is, so Malta is a small island nation. It's a European nation, you could pretty much say. It's basically in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. It's right south from Italy, and the interesting part that Malta has a very, very dense, I guess, population, as you can see from the map here, from the Google Earth. Malta, pretty much half of the island is, you could actually see the outlines from the actual city. So it has half, I believe the current population of Malta is around 500,000 people, right? So it's a small island nation in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, and it's also a member of the European Union, which is, I guess, why a lot of shady things tend to happen in this island, right?
Yeah, it seems when I was doing research for this, and admittedly, it's funny, until you brought it up in the map, I kind of forgot it was so far east in the Mediterranean. I thought it was closer to like maybe Crete. It's been like sort of this middle ground for so many cultures, going back even to early antiquity, and has changed hands across so many different empires, with the last quote unquote empire to, let's say, administrate it and exert power over it being the British Empire before they got their full independence, I believe, in the late 70s.
Exactly. So just an interesting fact to mention here, Malta is actually in a perfect position to be in a similar position as is Hawaii for the US. It's basically a military navy base, almost, you could say. At least that's what it was for throughout history. But at the same time, Malta has a fascinating history with the crusaders, and it was invaded by multiple, I guess, surrounding empires and nations. But for most part, they always defended the island because they had built massive fortresses, at least for that time, and pretty much the island for a long part of the history was basically no one could invade it. You know what I'm saying? But then also, it seems to me that as of late, corrupt politicians and corruption has invaded Malta. Not any sort of foreign powers, but I guess there are more internal issues that this island nation is facing at the moment than, for say, external ones, right?
Yeah, it was when I was researching about this and looking into both the events we're about to talk about, but also just in general, it's almost shocking how much violence. It's almost similar in some ways, I guess, to its neighbor to the north there, Sicily, which has had a long history of organized crime and let's say political and economic violence. For such a small country, the events we're about to describe would be shocking in a massive country like the United States or Russia, or in a huge city with millions of people. So for an island with less than 500,000 people on it, two islands really with less than 500,000 people on them, it's just kind of amazing that this persists so much.
Right, I just wanted to add a comparison. Could you imagine all of these things happening in, for say, Cleveland? Could you imagine?
It would be like a national emergency. I mean, the FBI would be showing up in mass, and there would be massive civil rights investigations, and it would be like the scandal of the decade.
Exactly. So, but this all happens in one island. So, what was the crazy statistic? 7 car bombings in 11 months.
6 years. You saw that,
right?
Yeah,
6 years, something like that. So,
every
year.
That blew my mind.
Exactly.
I can't even remember the last time I heard of a car bombing happening in the U.S. And admittedly, not everything makes the news or makes it across the nation. But I mean, when's the last time in Lithuania they had a car bombing?
We had those. We definitely had those back in the 90s, after the Soviet Union collapsed. We had those, but not in 2017 or in the last 6 years. I believe none. Right. Yeah, definitely. Right. So
it's a sign of maybe a stable economy and law and order.
The thing is, Malta's economy is not that bad. like, let's mention this fact really quickly. I mean, a large part of that is because, it's a tropical island in the Mediterranean, and it attracts a lot of tourists. So from what you can see from the Google Earth, you see a lot of, boats, a lot of yachts. It seems like a really cool place to visit. So I guess the main resources of Malta's wealth at the moment are tourism, and then they also have that financial sector developed as well. So you have like the Barclay Bank of England, basically having their own, I guess, not headquarters, but like what I'm saying is there are a lot of financial sector companies in Malta that operate here as well. So I guess that's also one of the reasons why the country has a lot of shady things going on inside it. So right, so I guess let's try to develop the story here for the audience. So right, so this is Daphne once again. So the way she was killed was, as we've mentioned earlier, Malta has a big car bombing, I guess, problem, you could say, and she was actually killed by a car bomb as well. So she was driving her Peugeot car. It was a white 108 Peugeot model, I believe, and she was driving her car to the local bank on 16th of October in 2017, and all of a sudden her car exploded and pretty much she died on the spot. I mean, this is the official wreckage of that incident. So as you can see from this picture right here, there's probably no way anyone could survive that. So I guess the hit was perfectly executed, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the bomb was so powerful that it actually blew the car something like 45 meters off the road into a neighboring field, and I can't even imagine what was even left of her. But unfortunately, what was left of her, one of her children had to go find and encounter. It was just horrifying.
One of her children actually was the first witness of the crime. So he basically was at the house once the explosion happened, and let me just quickly find the location where Daphne was living. So she was living in a city called Bidnija, right? I hope I pronounced that right. I mean, we'll probably be pronouncing names.
Yeah, apologies. Yeah. Apologies to the fine people of Malta. I am sure that in your language, when it's pronounced right, these names are beautiful. It just they're somewhat hard to pronounce for those who are not live there.
Exactly. So this is the location of the car explosion. So it was a road in the middle of, I guess, the Maltese rural areas, if you could call them rural. Malta is so small. So right, so she was driving off from this ledge into the direction of the city, I believe, because she almost reached the city. Right now, looking at this graphic right here, I mean at the Google Earth right now, she was actually getting really close to the city, and I guess they could not have detonated the car any sooner. So right, so the way she was actually killed, she was killed by 3 men, right? Right, if I'm not mistaken. So
that's the accusation, yeah, that they were let's say the implementers
exactly
of the bomb, the lowest level of this crime conspiracy.
Exactly. So the first man that you're seeing right now is his name is Vincent Muscat. So oddly enough, the last name is the same as the prime minister, who's also a suspect, I believe, in this case as of right now as well, who is Joseph Muscat, but they are not related. Vincent Muscat, one of the people ordering executing the hit, was not related. I mean, I didn't find any relation, but I think it is just odd that their last names are the same. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, didn't bode well for the prime minister. It didn't. So
No,
it's like one of
no.
those unfortunate
Exactly, right?
coincidences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, so this was one of the guy who was part of the hit, and another two people were brothers, Alfred DiGiorgio and George DiGiorgio. We don't really have any good quality images of these guys. At least these pictures are the best ones that I've managed to find. So how the hit actually happened, there was a I've actually checked somewhere, right? So on September 16th, so exactly 1 month prior to Daphne's murder, she actually had her white Peugeot car at the dealers for minor repairs, and I believe some sort of inconsistencies in terms of who handled the car keys happened between the mechanics and the people who were supposed to give the car back to Daphne. I mean, don't quote me on this, but because I don't know the full story, but somehow the keys of her white vehicle happened to just turn up into one of the accused men's possession. So during the night, was it? Did they plant the bomb at the night before the murders, or was it earlier?
That's a good question. I mean, it would be horrible if, every time you get an oil job in Malta, you get, a free car bomb. But yeah, it certainly would seem like a strange, it always makes you wonder when these things happen. Like when you watch a movie, just because car bombs are like a common ploy in like gangster movies and stuff like that. You always wonder yourself, like, how did they do that without being seen? Like, did they do that in their driveway, or like to your point, did it happen somewhere else off site?
Also seems like a risky situation trying to plant the car bomb, because you could also blow yourself up in the process. So I mean, how the car bomb actually worked, it was basically detonated by a text message from a phone. So I believe there were two SIM cards involved. Right, you have SIM cards in the US, I'm assuming, right? Just to make
Yep.
sure. Okay, so yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. So basically, two SIM cards were involved. One was in a Nokia phone, just a regular Nokia. I believe it was not even a smartphone. It was just, I guess, a phone that could make text messages. So a basic Nokia phone, like I believe an old school version of it, and then the other basically SIM card was placed inside the bomb that was planted on the car. And once, basically, how the bomb was detonated is it was one of these guys was on a boat far away from the actual car explosion spot. So I believe somewhere in Valletta area, and one of the other brothers was nearby this area of the car explosion. He was actually spotting the car, and once he made sure that actually Daphne was in the car alone, and basically once he had that information, he messaged that other guy on the boat. He didn't outright message Daphne's in the car, blow up the car. They used some sort of a code, like, just something about wine, like pick up some wine or something like that, just for their own safety. But obviously that didn't work out for them in the end. And then the other person on the boat basically sent the text message, which later on, I guess, detonated the bomb. And this is what the car looked afterwards, right? So that's how the killing was done.
Wow, it's interesting because it's very similar, almost identical to how, like, during the past Gulf War that the U.S. has been in, I believe a lot of the terrorists and sort of resistance in the the countries we were fighting will use that same technique where they use like you said, a mobile phone. It sounds like almost like a burner phone, just sort of a throwaway prepaid account or something. And yeah, just
I mean,
yeah,
I mean, I was going to ask you, do you know exactly how the men were captured? I mean, apprehended by the police force? Because I didn't really look into that part of the theory. I mean, it's the story, but yeah.
That seems it was a bit elusive. I haven't found that detail either. They seem so certain that these three people did it, and I don't know if it's because like maybe there's some surveillance that they're reluctant to reveal to us yet, or maybe they never will reveal it. Maybe it'll just be I don't know how the Maltese court system works, but maybe that you can provide secret evidence. I know sometimes, especially for court cases that have to do with maybe important government information, maybe they have some kind of eavesdropping or some way, or maybe even the U.S. who knows helped. Maybe we had a little bit of eavesdropping going on Maltese communications anyway, because we seem to be listening on everything else in general. And here's a tip.
Right, I've actually heard somewhere or during my research, but once again, don't quote me on this because I'm not 100% sure if this is accurate, but I believe the FBI helped investigate the murders, which would make sense.
That's right.
The FBI has like a lot more, better technology, better, specialists, because there are only like 500,000 people living in Malta, so it's right. It would make sense that some sort of external, institutions came to help here, but I guess once the FBI is involved, you could pretty much be sure that if there's some sort of a trace of some sort of evidence or some sort of footsteps left behind by the killers, they will be found. And I guess that what happened to these three men right here. And so basically these are the guys that are responsible for killing Daphne, but they only sort of served a hit, and I believe they were paid $150,000, which is really cheap, I would say. Wouldn't you say? Like this reporter who was reporting on basically billions of dollars flowing into the country, and you got these three guys basically doing the hit for 150,000. That's like a really cheap way to solve a problem for those shady people, right?
Yeah, it seems so sad. I mean, at least that's the accusation, right? From the Maltese government, that these three people, and then a greater conspiracy above them, did this crime. It's interesting because when you look at Daphne's career, and even before she started her official career, when she was, I guess, essentially a freshman in college, she was always, I guess, not shy about expressing her opinions about, let's say, justice and right and wrong when it came to her country and how things operated, and I think in terms of, I guess, the way things should be, and especially corruption seems to be a very sore point. So she had, right after college, she, I think, was fortunate enough to have become a journalist right away at a prominent publication, and had worked her way, up, let's say, paid her dues as far as a journalist goes, doing very serious reporting. She had worked for several different papers there. She had multiple projects going. She had, different columns. In fact, even the day of her murder, she published a blog post that was pretty incendiary in terms of accusations it made, and pointing the fingers at different kinds of corruption. And she had also already paid a price for that. So I think it's important, as we describe, what happened to Daphne and this aftermath of her death, the murder. It's important to look at how this is not somebody that was surprised by this. This is somebody that, in fact, expected it, but had turned down police protection because she felt she could not do her job with it. So she had multiple pets killed or maimed,
Yeah,
and then
multiple
had to,
dogs. Yeah,
yeah, like you couldn't be a dog and belong to her and
nope,
apparently make it out
nope.
the year, right? Yeah,
Exactly
just
right.
and even it was even dangerous to be her neighbor. Her neighbor's car, it seems like, was accidentally firebombed when they were trying to get her car. I guess they mixed up
Yeah, they
whose
mix up.
house was who.
Yeah, another thing, her house door was set on fire, I believe,
Oh my
multiple
gosh.
times. So, yeah, all sorts of things. And she was getting basically threats almost on a daily basis because her her blog that she started in 2008 was, I believe, it had more viewership than all of the other Maltese, I guess, media outlets combined. So this pretty much just tells you how powerful this woman essentially was in Malta, and how, I guess, widely respected she was, and why this case had so much, why this case was so widely publicized in Europe. I believe there were, even like American news outlets like Fox and CNN are covering it as we speak. So yeah, she was a really, I guess, an authority figure in terms of investigating Malta. And since Malta has this really big corruption, I guess, problem, she was like the leading person trying to fix the situation. However, her work essentially caught up with her, and she got murdered. And if she did get murdered for 150,000, that just so unfortunate, because she was unraveling a lot more, I guess, dirty money flow than the people that killed her got. So it's
It's
weird.
it's almost an insult, right? I mean, you look at her.
Definitely,
I mean,
right? You
the
you would
the
have to like order a hit for like $10 million or something like
yeah.
that. Not something cheap. But I guess
But
they got the cheapest guys in town or something.
they found, see, this is what happens when you don't go for quality. You get caught and it all unravels,
I
and you
mean,
don't go for the quality professionals apparently.
right, so these
And
guys, Alfred DiGiorgio and George DiGiorgio, so they're brothers, and I guess this was sort of a family business of theirs, I'm assuming, doing this sort of line of work, for say. And I mean, they don't really look like, high level assassination professionals to me. They're wearing, like regular clothes, but I guess that's what you have to do. They don't look like a hitman per se, but a man who does look like a hitman is Yorgen Yorgen Fenech. Right. I guess this was a good jump to, like, if you asked me who was the hitman out of all of these four people, I would probably pick this guy. So this guy is the richest man in Malta, at least as of 2019. He is a 38-year-old Maltese businessman. He is involved in the energy sector, the tourism sector, and I believe also he owns a lot of gambling facilities as well, casinos, maybe some sort of betting organizations, stuff like that. And he doesn't
I,
look like a good guy, right?
I hate to laugh, but I mean, it's almost like the only thing that's missing from sort of the organized crime stereotype, it would be like he doesn't have a trash collection or vending machine business. That would be the final nail in
Exactly, right.
yeah, that would be like the bingo card of organized crime qualifications. I'm going to take one stab at his last name. If I'm looking at it, looks like it's Fenech.
Fenech.
Once again, yeah, because I'm just looking at Fenech.
Once again, pardon
Yeah,
if we
pardon.
miss. Yeah,
Sorry, Malta. It's
exactly.
just
So why we brought this guy up is because recently he has been arrested. I believe this was 2 days ago. So as of 2019, December 4th, I believe he was arrested 2 days ago. So that would be December 2nd, and he was arrested because he is as of right now, the main suspect in terms of who ordered the hit on Daphne. So this guy right here, and this is where the case gets really interesting, and this is where you will start, I guess, seeing all the connections between the elite of Malta and the death of Daphne. So this guy, one of his, I guess, businesses is involved in the energy sector, and I guess Daphne was, as at the time of her death, she was uncovering some interesting information about this guy right here, and she was probably going to make that information public, some sort of shady money information. And
Yeah.
I guess this guy took it into his own hands to make sure that that information doesn't come out or something like that, but
Yeah,
it
they seem to
backfired.
they seem to be a little bit like they're still not entirely sure of the exact dimensions of what was going on with this company, but it seems like it was heavily enmeshed in potentially some kind of money laundering connected to these other shell companies that these other very prominent politicians in the Maltese government, so the prime minister and his close friend who also had a high position in government, they were named in the Panama Papers, I believe, as being some of a very long list of people internationally that had these different shell companies that were essentially used to launder money or hide, let's say, income from different revenue streams, whether it was illicit or not. It was, at the end of the day, hiding money that, should have been taxed or, should have rightfully been helping fund, let's say, things that taxes fund. So, if someone really rich like this is using a shell company to hide even their legitimate business income, well, they're essentially cheating the taxpayers of the countries they live in. Right?
Exactly. So this is a brilliant infographic right here that pretty much depicts what the Panama Papers scandal was. So as you can see, there were almost 5,000 stories published about, different, I guess, high-ranking people all over the world who had, I guess, opened up shell companies in the Panama area so they could pretty much either launder money or take bribes, because as of 2019 you can't just receive for say $2 million into your bank account and expect no one to ask questions, right? That's not how banks work anymore. So if you're a high ranking, I guess, public official and you are trying to receive a bribe from somewhere, then I guess the safest way, at least before the Panama Papers scandal, was to basically receive that money in your own personal Panama shell company that you have opened up. And I guess that's the only way, because Panama works basically on its own jurisdiction and they really don't care about anything. They take all sorts of money. It's basically what the country specializes in, right? So this is their specialty. And as you can see from this map right here, you are Malta was also one of the countries involved. And interesting. I believe right now I'm seeing my own country, Lithuania, is actually involved as well, but in the previous map that I've seen, it wasn't involved, so who knows. But no one from Lithuania was, like, I guess, publicly accused of being involved, at least not that I've heard of. But yeah, you could pretty much see, like, most of Europe is covered, so literally all of the North America.
Yeah,
right.
I was thinking to myself, well, whether or not Lithuania got swept up in this, it looks pretty shameful for pretty much my whole continent and the one south of us.
Right. I mean,
yeah.
Asia looks. There's no information from China, which is just wild when you think about it. Like, or Iran or Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I think that's.
Or Russia. Or wait. Where's Russia? Anyways, this is weird.
I think maybe Putin and Xi made this map.
This could be like a map made by Putin, because I don't believe Lithuania was involved, and Putin just tries to, I guess, make us look bad, but whatever. Anyways, yeah. So basically, this. I guess the scale of the Panama Papers is really crazy. So in total, there was, I believe, $110 million that was sort of, I guess, shady money that sort of flowed into the Panama shell companies, I guess, for bribes and various other activities. And one of the men, I guess, accused of being involved in one of those shady activities is the Prime Minister of Malta. So let me just jump to his picture right there. So this is Joseph Muscat. He was actually a really popular politician in Malta before the death of Daphne, and actually just a few days ago he announced that by the end of, by January 2020 he will be resigning as the Prime Minister of Malta. And actually the European Union, I guess, mission to Malta, I guess staff members suggested that he should resign immediately. So it's an ongoing process, and it's actually going to be interesting to see if this man right here lasts the whole month in his seat, or does he resign earlier. I believe he's going to stay in here until January in the position, but unless, he gets arrested for the murder. So I mean, what are the links between him and the death of Daphne? Like, what are the links between the murder, I guess?
So it sounds like the issue was that she had, poked her stick into a lot of, let's say, dark places where, there were so many of these prominent politicians who were involved in, like you said, this sort of seemingly foolproof plan to potentially get things like bribes. And truth be told, besides the other violence that she had already experienced before her death from them, they had also used other weapons like the legal system, where they had filed, let's say, we talked last week with the Kendrick Johnson episode, we talked about how the law can be used as a weapon, and that certainly was the case here, where they tried to silence her with the legal system. They sued her for libel. They tried to assign these huge, these fees, whatever fees they could, let's say penalties against her, to try to muzzle her. I mean, they tried everything in the book to get her to shut up and to get her to not point out that these very prominent politicians had these companies and were named in these papers, and it wasn't even just like the prime minister. It was like his wife, and the prime minister's wife, his family members, his close friends, and then I think what sort of was the last nail in the coffin for him politically was that he was kind of, I don't know if this was really in good faith or not. He was saying, we're gonna, no stone shall be unturned, and we're going to find out who did this. And you know what? If the middleman in this will come forward and tell us who did it, I'll grant him immunity. And everyone's like, wait, you're gonna
grant immunity to the guy who was involved in the killing, right?
Yeah, the higher up, like so you're gonna throw these three dummies under the bus, and then the middleman presumably is this Yorgen Fenech guy. So
wait, no, I don't think he was the middleman, right?
Well, that's the question, right? So is he in the
I believe the middleman is like the guy between Yorgen and those three guys that we discussed earlier. So and the middleman, I believe the middleman like pretty much spilled the beans and exposed Yorgen. At least that's what I've gathered, okay, but I could be wrong.
That's where I was trying to kind of parse through this and figure out what made everybody so mad, because I think you're right. I think also that some people were still confused and perceived it like this Yorgen guy could conceivably, depending on how you twist the truth and twist the facts.
Yorgen's in jail, by the way, so he's arrested. So
yeah, he's but what I mean, like they'll have someone turn state's witness and then say I'll tell everything. And I mean I think just even the fact that anybody in that whole chain of scoundrels could get off was
Exactly.
pretty offensive to the public.
Exactly, because the public, there were massive protests after she died, and ever since I guess Daphne died, the Prime Minister Joseph Muscat has been under a lot of scrutiny because Daphne's work, mainly, at least I guess the latter part of her work, almost like mainly was all around this guy right here, Joseph Muscat, and his, I guess, nationalistic party. So, because they were essentially like really shady politicians, allegedly. We don't want to get sued here, so it's all alleged. But these guys are allegedly very, very shady. Like, even from like the pictures that you see, this guy seems really like, you know what I'm saying? Almost like a James Bond villain, right?
that picture of him smirking doesn't help, right? Yeah, he
Exactly.
definitely.
And he has a lot of those. Like, he has a bunch of these pictures where he's like,
Yeah.
just seems like a really shady ass guy. But right, so I guess how it all involves the Prime Minister of Malta is that his chief of staff, who is, I guess, Keith Chembry, this man right here, who also doesn't have like the most, I guess, the most innocent face as in the world, right? So he actually had close connections to Jorgen, the businessman slash hitman Malta person right here. And since this man right here was I guess caught by the police, and he is as of now the prime suspect involved in the case, in the investigation. And when your chief of staff, this person right here, has close connections to the guy who essentially ordered the hit on the investigative journalist that reports heavily on you and not in a favorable manner, that leaves the prime minister in a tough situation. And I guess it was too much to handle, and he pretty much, I guess, resigned. Well, he hasn't yet resigned, but he stated that by the end of the month, right after New Year's, he will leave the post. He will no longer be the Prime Minister of Malta. And the funny thing is, I believe the proceedings will be so that one of his other party members will now be elected as the Prime Minister of Malta. So that's just another shady person, most likely, right? I mean, that's what it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, it really makes you feel bad for the people of Malta because, with such a relatively small population and so much violence and corruption in such a small time frame, they really deserve better. It seems like such a shame. When you and I were talking before we started recording, because we were just sort of trying to do a tally of like car bombings and, the high density of car bombings around this case. And, it was like there's 6 for the year or something like that. And, when I was doing research, I was like, well, let me look at the U.S. and see how many car bombings I could find. And unfortunately, there wasn't any ready statistics about it. But Wikipedia only lists 13 car bombings for the U.S. that you can actually look up and find out facts about. And actually, some of those are pretty fascinating. But I mean, it got to be where it was a commonplace event there.
Exactly.
I mean,
Right.
It's shocking.
It's definitely shocking, but at the same time, you have to put other things into consideration, such as this is the smallest EU member state, and what that means is basically it's a perfect place for Russian, I guess, people close to Putin from Russia, like shady politicians from Russia or shady businessmen, to basically get their passports and citizenship to an EU member state in a pretty easy manner, because I believe it's I mean, once again, I'm not really certain how much passport and a citizenship of Malta costs, but the government is actually selling passports, and I believe it's like 250,000 or something of that matter for essentially for a passport into the EU. And why this citizenship of an EU member state is so important. Sure, you get the passport with the Maltese, I guess, insignia on the passport, but at the same time you get freedom of movement in most of Europe. And what that also means, freedom of capital movement through most of Europe. So mostly Russian, I guess, shady businessmen, they basically buy these passports in Malta. They never set foot in Malta because the sale of these passports usually take place in Dubai. And yeah, once they get, I guess, the passports, they are free to invest their shady Russian capital all over Europe, all over Italy, wherever they want, really. Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Lithuania, wherever you decide. So I guess this is the government's little sort of private business, right? Because this is where the offshore shell companies come in place, because for say the passport costs a certain amount of money. Let's say the official, because this is all official, like this is I guess a legal proceeding. This is definitely a legal proceeding to buy the passport. But I guess if you want to make sure that the passport comes quickly and you're not double checked, your background is not double checked, your most likely shady Russian or Middle Eastern background does not get checked, you will probably send some extra, thousands of dollars to the state officials shell company in Panama, and then all of a sudden you're a transparent man and you get handed that Maltese citizenship in quick succession, I guess. You know what I'm trying to say. So this is, I guess, one of the business models of the Maltese government, and it seems to be working well for them. They are getting rich of this business of the sale of passports.
That's fascinating. I wasn't aware of this at all. I mean, it's like unfortunate because I mean, you as an EU citizen, out of the two of us, I mean, you I think lose out, or all EU citizens lose out in terms of lack of transparency and letting people in who like I think especially it's almost selecting for people who potentially are massively dishonest, just by dint of them, buying a citizenship that shouldn't be able to be bought. It makes you wonder why the rest of the EU doesn't crack down on practices like this. Is it because Malta is so important in the bigger picture of the financial, let's say, underpinnings of the EU, or how money's being transferred, or is it because all the rest of these folks in these countries like Germany and the UK and France, etc. I can't remember if France is a EU member. It is, right?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
They maybe they all have Panamanian accounts too, or accounts that are similar to that.
There are definitely businesses, very I guess big businesses that operate out of Malta. You have the engineering giants Siemens from Germany, who actually have been I guess involved with this case. I forgot how they were involved, but also you have German engineering companies in here, you have English banks, you have German banks, you have all sorts of like financial institutions operating out of Malta. And I guess it's definitely an important member state, given the fact of its, I guess, interesting geographical positioning, and once again those close, I guess, financial sector ties to the European Union's other member states. And it's just in general, it's like a fascinating place, a lot of good architecture here, and as you can see, they also have the docks developed as well, and there's a lot of tourism in here. So this Malta as a country is definitely a big asset to the European Union as a whole. So yeah, I mean, another interesting fact that Malta is really close to, Italy and Sicily and places like that, which sort of have, I guess, you know what I'm saying, traditions in like this sort of, I guess, dealings, like these corruptions and things like that. So they're almost like Italians, because the Maltese official languages are English and Maltese, but I believe 60% of the population speak fluent Italian. So it's a very similar, I guess, community of people to Italians. Their culture is really sort of, I guess, Italian, but then also mixed with British, because of the colonial times. And yeah, I mean, they're definitely intertwined with the EU pretty heavily, especially in terms of like businesses, because a small country like this, they will not be engineering or production giants like Germany, but you really don't need to be that big of a country to be a massive financial sector player. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to be kind of fair to them, or to other countries in the area where, like you alluded to, there's kind of a higher level of latent corruption, and in terms of, let's say, wheelings and dealings. I mean, I can only imagine if you're sort of in this, what we'd almost call the cradle of modern civilization, and you're in an area where you're kind of getting conquered and reconquered, though. As I was looking at the research, apparently keeping Malta out of the hands of the Germans was a major source of, let's say, both inspiration and pride to Britain, but also, I think, to the point where they have like some kind of special award for Malta, because it really, like the rest of those areas around them fell. Crete fell, unfortunately, etc.
Right, and the funny thing is, Britain is no longer in the EU. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
So
yeah,
I guess that makes the link a little bit less deep in terms of it's the connection between Malta and the European Union, but I guess but it's an independent country as of right now. They are their own. They're doing their own thing. It's not like it's Britain anymore. But
I just wonder if like maybe, if you're kind of there where like you're kind of getting conquered and reconquered, maybe at some point there was more cultural tolerance for, let's say, cutting a deal.
Exactly.
Cutting a deal. But now it's a different world, and to your point, like Lithuania at some point separated itself from, let's say, the Soviet Union, and one kind of set of rules and culture and way of doing things. And I think Lithuania and other countries that joined the EU, part of the benefit and the reason you would join the EU is a respect for a certain kind of law and order and a certain kind of set of practices. I mean, corruption is insidious in that it really does undermine the rule of law and the fairness of a society, to the point where, here in the U.S., U.S. companies can face criminal penalties, not just civil, but criminal penalties for even paying bribes, even in marketplaces and even in negotiations where, let's say, our European competitor companies are paying bribes to those countries. Here in the U.S., there is explicit legislation around you actually having to pay some kind of, actual penalty, whether that's jail time or money or both, for engaging in any kind of corruption, even if it means that we lose the deal. So that's how important corruption can be to, let's say, a democracy or a democratic way of life. So it's kind of amazing that Daphne essentially almost martyred herself to the cause of, like, let's say, helping the EU keep corruption outside of its borders.
Exactly. Before we because we have been rolling for 50 minutes, and I think we still have a few other key players to mention here. So this guy right here is Conrad Mizzi. So he was the energy, I guess, the energy minister of Malta at the time of, Daphne's death. And, this is where we see more links between the prime minister and the death of Daphne, because this guy was also, from the same party that the prime minister was in, and he was also a close friend to the minister. And him being the energy, I guess, minister, and Yorgen being involved in the energy business, and him potentially, I guess, ordering the hit on Daphne, once again we see how this looks really bad for, I guess, our main guy, Joseph Muscat. So this is another link between them. Right, anything you wanted to mention on Conrad? Because there, I believe, one more person we need to talk about besides him.
Nope, we can definitely keep moving.
Right, wait, who was the next? Oh yeah, Jorgen, and I believe, the next connection that we have to discuss is, for some reason, I don't really know why, but Malta and the Maltese government, and especially, there's no way of denying this allegation by, I guess, the Prime Minister of Malta, Joseph Muscat, that he actually has close connections to the Azerbaijani government and the Azerbaijani president, who is basically this guy on the left. He is Aliyev, that's his last name, and he, just from the way he's talking to President Vladimir Putin, you could probably, and his big nose, but I don't know why I mentioned that, but he just seems like not the most, I guess, not the most innocent politician as well. So but that's just a whole nother thing. Everyone pretty much knows that this guy is fairly shady, and essentially what had happened, this guy's wife, so this lady right here, I don't really have her name right here, but I just know that, so this wife, this is the president's wife, and they have a daughter, and from her daughter's, I guess, accounts, there has been sent $1 million to Joseph Muscat's wife. So it all happened through the shell companies and through the Panama, I guess, papers. This information basically leaked out. At first, I guess, Joseph Muscat was denying this information, as you do, because you are you have the highest, I guess, position in terms of power in the country, and you're not gonna, if this information does end up being true, then your career as a politician is pretty much over. So at first he was denying this information, that his wife received the $1 million from the, I guess, Azerbaijani government, but then the Panama Papers leaked essentially, and that information was exposed, and there was, I guess, nowhere to hide from there. So there's another link, and I'm interested, why does the Maltese government have close links to Azerbaijan for say, right? Because Azerbaijan is not the biggest player in the region. They do have a lot of links with Russia in terms of selling the passports to Russians and other Middle Eastern shady citizens for say, but why do they have links with the Azerbaijani government? I believe it's because Azerbaijan uses Malta as a money laundering, essentially a place where they can launder money. Because another interesting fact is that there was this bank opened up. I can't tell you the name of it, but I probably will add it in post-production. There was this bank in Malta that was, I guess, established in 2013, right at the time when Joseph Muscat's nationalistic party, I guess, won the elections. So that's a convenient timing, I guess. And this bank only had 180 accounts opened. So that would seem weird for a bank. How could a bank be successful and only have 180 accounts open, but at the same time, the transfers, I guess the grand sum of transfers were in the billions. So you could pretty much see that this bank was very successful with only 180 accounts. And actually, I will try to find this and add this in the post-production, probably as we are speaking right now. So yeah, maybe somewhere along in the episode, I will add this. I guess, footage where the bank owner of this particular bank was actually filmed leaving the bank with, like, I guess big suitcases of, like, information, or I don't believe it was money in those suitcases, but there were, like, a lot of, I guess, documents. And he took a flight in the middle of the night to Azerbaijan, and the next morning, this guy right here, Joseph Muscat, actually ordered the investigation on the bank and I guess to look through the documents, but they couldn't find anything because the documents were already in Azerbaijan. So it's crazy, right? So it just the corruption in Malta. I guess this episode is, I guess it serves a point in terms of just showing how corrupt Malta actually is and how corrupt the party is, because this is a European member state and you would not expect something like that from an European Union member state. That just almost seems like like just crazy that a country from the EU, like its government, would sort of be involved with a car explosion. Like this is straight up mafia right here, and it's just wild, right? It's definitely wild.
One last note about Azerbaijan, because you were you had pointed out the monetary connections, and they're pretty damning. I mean, especially the part about the bank. As I look up Azerbaijan, I see in Wikipedia the number one thing about their economy is the energy market. So they're part of the South Caucasus pipeline that brings natural gas through Turkey to Europe.
Yes.
And we notice a lot of these prominent folks. In this case, Yorgen Fenech, case in point. Big oil energy company person. And then, as you pointed out, the picture of the president with Putin, and Putin, of course, depending on whose side you take, whether you take Putin's side or everyone else's, there's been a lot of cases where some of Putin's friends suddenly found themselves in charge of big sectors of the Russian economy and energy markets and got really rich. And then some of those friends weren't his friends anymore and are in jail for the rest of their lives. And he has their money now. So there seems to be kind of a energy market club of it almost seems like a cartel action. And by cartel, I mean like price fixing and collaboration, to make sure everybody's sort of in agreement about who's going to charge what price for what.
Exactly, because Azerbaijan is actually a really big exporter of, oil as well, because they just happen to be on the right side of the Caspian Sea where oil is involved. And right, so I mean, Azerbaijan has its own interesting history, for say, with trying to, I guess, invade their neighbors like Armenia and things like that, because Azerbaijan has close links, at least culturally, to Turkey, and you could see where Armenia is like in a bad situation, because Turkey had that genocide, the Armenian genocide situation happen, which was really unfortunate, and it almost seems like Armenia is just stuck in between Azerbaijan and Turkey, who don't necessarily have Armenia's best interests in mind, to say the least. So so it just sort of gives, I guess, another insight on how like Azerbaijan works as a whole, and they have a beautiful capital, Baku, that was basically built from ground up after the economy started booming with all the oil money coming in, and I guess President Aliyev sort of needs ways to launder that money. So one of the ways, or at least close associates to President Aliyev, and I guess one of the ways to do that is through, I guess, laundering through Malta, because Malta is a member state of the EU, has EU banks, and has a very, very shady government. So it's just a perfect place for money laundering, right?
Totally. So as we come to sort of the closing of this episode, what's your opinion about like what happens after this? Like, do you think this is a tipping point for Malta where, given just the massive public outrage and, this really prominent journalist who was awarded posthumously just this whole slew of awards from different organizations around the world. I mean, she really has become a hero in an era where a lot of journalists are already dying across the world, where, you have in Mexico, you have a lot of journalists dying from cartels, and you have journalists in places like Russia dying for political reasons.
But that's almost expected. But this is a EU member state, so
Yeah, this is different.
This is different, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from your perspective, I mean, being you being an EU citizen, what do you think about this? Do you think that this is like a point where a country like Malta throws down the gauntlet and says, no more, we're not going to put up with this. This is ridiculous. We shouldn't have 7 car bombings in a year and lose our best political journalist. And, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that, after Daphne died, there are a lot of people who are definitely living easier now, because the blog is, no longer operational. However, there are a lot of fellow, investigators or like investigative journalists of Daphne who are continuing her work as we speak. So I think this was sort of a big wake-up call to the Maltese, population and the citizens of Malta, and they actually started protesting really hard, and they forced the prime minister to resign. So let's hope for the best for Malta, but it's, since Daphne's death, I don't think this moves Malta into the right, direction at all. I think, if anything, this is probably setting Malta back a lot, because, it just pretty much showed that if you get, if you go in too deep into the dark information that revolves around the government, then you will be essentially shut down eventually, and the elite and the politically powerful individuals, they will just continue practicing their shady practices, shady businesses, and that's pretty much what's going to happen. But at the same time, that Yorgen guy, that hitman looking business dude right here, he did get arrested. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen the next, few months in regards to this guy right here, and what's going to happen to the nationalistic party of Malta that was led by the Prime Minister Joseph Muscat. It's, I think it's all up in the air. I think anything could happen. Maybe this is going to set Malta on the right track, but at the same time, it's most likely, at least from my perspective, it's most likely not going to happen, because the country is pretty much built on shady money. They have those yachts, they have everything pretty much out of the shady money industry. So I think that's going to keep happening, and I guess that's my take on the episode.
To that point, I mean, I wonder, you make a very compelling argument that it's pretty entrenched. I wonder if a potential solution is, I mean, outside of course, folks like this who are implicated in a serious crime of someone's life being lost. What, imagine you're you're somebody like this prime minister who potentially there's evidence that they've been taking bribes or, been doing something shady and not legal. Do you think that there's room for someone like that outside of the murder, not involved in the murder, for amnesty, to have some kind of amnesty period and maybe a truth and reconciliation commission where they say, listen, corrupt people, here's your chance. Throw yourself in the mercy. We'll let you keep the bribes. You can keep your account. Like, no more. Don't take any more bribes. But you're going to pay taxes on what you took or what you on what you've been socking away, and come clean with us. Show us where all the bodies are buried, etc. Figuratively speaking, of course, not literally, but financially, and from here on, like, I wonder if that would give incentives for things like this not to happen. If there was some kind of forgiveness, maybe that would give the society a chance to transition more bloodlessly. Yeah, though obviously it's a little dirtier. You're breaking a few eggs still, but maybe that gets you in the right direction. What are your thoughts?
I mean, it would be nice if that would actually happen, but given the fact how, I guess, bureaucratic the EU is, I don't think it would be acceptable, by the EU Commission to just let these guys keep the bribes, because it would sort of send a message to other EU member states that maybe we can do this as well, and once we get caught, we just keep the bribes. So, it would, like, I would be up for that, but then once again, like, what do you really think that these people right here, they would just sort of lay low for the rest of their, I guess, political careers and not do anything shady anymore? Like, I believe they would like lay low for a year or two, but it's the money is so good that there's so many opportunities to take that money. So I think that would not work out that well. I think a sort of a new political power needs to emerge in Malta, essentially. Maybe the opposition could actually take over and do a better job, but I haven't done my research into the opposition. I believe it's the Social Democrats or something like that, and maybe they will do a better job, because come next elections, I sort of expect them to win those elections, because I can't see this guy's nationalist party winning the next elections. Like that it's just probably not going to happen. So, or maybe a new political power will emerge in Malta, and maybe they will be the good guys, until they get corrupt eventually, because that just seems how Malta's society works. Like, you could come in, trying to work for the best interest for the country, but then end up becoming shady and, ordering, I guess, car explosions on the people that try to make things, I guess, better for the country, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is unfortunate. It's you have to try to figure out incentives, but yeah, to your point, you don't also want to give reasons for all the other EU members to have bad incentives. Well, so sad. I mean, such a beautiful country, and such an ugly event to happen to really such a beautiful person inside, such a heroic journalist, and really, I think, a role model for the right kind of crusading against let's say evil in your society.
Right. I mean, yeah, since we're at that 1 hour and 10-minute mark, I think it's time to wrap up the episode, because I think all the information that we have prepared to discuss, we pretty much discussed, at least in most part. And right, anything you want to mention to our audience and our viewers on YouTube that that are watching?
Yeah, thank you for listening. Please subscribe. Later this week, we hope to change things up with a return back to the paranormal.
Yep.
And I'm looking forward to reviewing that as one of my favorite cases. So we're just going to tease that a little bit and
Oh,
stay tuned.
you don't want to
Say what it is?
Okay.
The Phoenix Lights.
Yeah,
That's
like
what
I was going to
gonna
mention
be.
it regardless. Yeah, so
Yeah,
we'll be covering the Phoenix Light. I believe by the end of the week, and I don't know. Both episodes should come out like at the same week. So when you're watching this episode, if you're watching it at the same day it has been released, the next episode will probably come out somewhere along this week, maybe later on, maybe on the weekend. I'm thinking Saturday is most likely the most plausible time for episode 16, the Phoenix Light incident, which is fascinating. We will have a lot of interesting, I believe, video footage, and but that's for the next time. And right, guys, as usual, I guess this was the Solvable Mysteries Podcast, episode number 15. And yeah, catch us on the next episode, and as always, stay safe and peace